So Jim, you've become a regular part of our program, it seems. You've
So it
been here
seems.
a couple of years in a row. Much like last year, I told you, say whatever's on your mind. And I know after last year, you will take me up on that. So I appreciate that. So I would ask you about the Red Sox, but I think we can kind of
Let's hold off on
skip
that for
this
a while.
season,
We
and
can
we'll
talk
talk
about the Boilermakers, though.
Yeah, we could talk about the Purdue Boilermakers, which if you haven't seen Jim yet, he's got the lanyard. He's very proud. So for at least 4 more days, he's happy as can be. So after some years where reliability and resource adequacy wasn't top of mind for policymakers or the public, it seems that that situation has changed. We've seen front page stories in the Washington Post and the New York Times, amongst other news outlets, which suggest to me that it's broken through to the general public as opposed to just the energy sector of the news cycle. And it's been focusing on a lot of the energy challenges that are before us. And I think we certainly can attribute that in large part to you raising the alarm on some of the issues that we have that previously were described as emerging, and I think based on your most recent couple of reports, we can say those are now real concerns and not emerging issues, and it's across broad parts of North America. So let's get into some of the issues that I think need attention and we want to get your thoughts on. So we're back in 2024. What's different from last year, and do you have any good news that you can share with us about, or in the alternative, are there other warnings that we should be aware of?
Well, I think the outlook remains very sober as we go forward. We'll be publishing our summer reliability assessment here in the next month or so, and I don't anticipate it's going to be dramatically different than what we've talked about in the past. But I think there are 3 or 4 things that have changed over the last year that are encouraging, or at least 3 that are encouraging and 1 very concerning. On the encouraging front, we managed to get a lot of solar and a lot of batteries deployed in the last year. And that really helped us navigate through this massive heat dome that we had over the lower third of the continent. So I think we should be really happy about the performance of those assets as well as our ability to deploy them. Second, I think there's some positive news on the fuel front. In California, Governor Newsom's extended the life of Aliso Canyon, which is a very critical asset to support the gas delivery system and the power plants in California. Politically courageous decision. I think this is pending, not yet approved, but it looks like the Everett Marine Terminal outside of Boston Harbor will be extended. Which brings some much needed fuel security to the Northeast. I think I read that New York is now either has approved or is considering approving adding compression to some of the pipelines serving the state there. So again, kind of counter to the political winds. So that's great news, right? That we're getting a little bit more acceptance of the importance of gas in the mix. And I guess the third thing I would say is very positive is there's a more serious conversation around transmission than we've had before. And that hasn't resulted in any projects getting built yet, although we did commission the SunZia project last summer. Only took 17 years, but our first major interstate transmission project, even though it was just 2 states. But there's a lot of discussion around transmission. We got a little homework assignment from Congress last summer to do a nationwide study of interregional transfer capacity, which I think will help unlock some real understanding of the value of transmission and the importance of getting it built. On the flip side, in our LTRA we published in December, and as Emil referenced as well as Nate, the load growth challenge is going to become very, very acute very quickly. Our numbers showed basically a doubling of the growth rate relative to the past 10 years. I think when we update those numbers this fall, it'll be higher still. And that's due to kind of repatriation of manufacturing, major chip plants being built in Arizona, our use of technology, driving data center growth, and particularly AI. I guess that's the other big thing with ChatGPT now becoming and the Microsoft equivalent, and Google's got one too. But an AI query takes potentially 10 times the amount of energy that a simple Google search does, right? So as those products become more embedded in our in our way of life, right? The demands on for data centers and the like are going to continue to increase. And then, who knows exactly where we're going to go on electric transportation and building electrification, but there's a lot of policy kind of pushing to accelerate those trends. So, right now, electricity, I mentioned this last night, electricity is about 20% of end-use energy consumption. And electricity, of course, isn't an energy source, it's just a delivery mechanism. So if you really electrified the economy the way, some would like to see us do, that could be a quintupling the size of the sector, right? And we can't get anything built, right? So and until we get the permitting and siting issues challenged, we're going to be operating under an increasingly constrained set of conditions.
Yeah, fortunately for you, I'm not going to ask you to opine on permitting and siting since
Thank
that's the third rail, it seems, these days. So that being said, we're almost to the end of March, and we've almost made it through winter. I mean, technically we're in spring, but we always seem to get a blast of winter before it's all said and done. How would you assess the performance of the system over this year compared to the prior year?
Well, I think we got to be encouraged by the overall performance of the system during Jerry and Heather in January. Now we're taking a hard look. We announced a joint inquiry with FERC. We're going to do a kind of a light touch assessment, not quite as in-depth as we did with Uri and Elliott, but we really kind of want to understand why, with such a extreme and long duration and wide impact cold front, we didn't see the same kinds of BES impacts that we saw in those other two storms. Now, I say that, but I got to be really clear, right? We had a lot of what we call EEA3s, which is we're poised to shed load, called during that event. And we don't want to normalize those, right? Those are really bad days. So we were at the edge of fairly significant load shed events, but they didn't occur. We should be thankful for that, but we really kind of want to understand why and what that tells us about our winterization efforts, both as NERC, make sure that industry understands the lessons learned coming out of that, and that extends, of course, to the gas industry as well.
Sure. So some good news, some challenges that remain. I think that's going to be a consistent theme, is that there are challenges that remain.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of challenges, oh, go ahead. You want to add
I was going to
something?
say, the main thing that I took away thinking about the last three winters is, each of those, the NOAA forecast leading into the winter season was for a mild winter. And so far as I know, last winter and this past winter, the winter of 2023 and the winter of 2021-22, may have been mild on average. But it just goes to show that, averages don't mean anything in this business, right? Even in a mild winter, we can have one of these moments where the jet stream breaks down and all this Arctic air comes down south. So we got to stay on our toes for sure.
Indeed. And you've continued to focus on a couple of other issues that are challenging to the system, from IBRs, which I know inverter-based resources are something you're focused on, gas electric harmonization, which we're going to talk about later, but also cyber and physical security risks. So can you kind of talk to us a little bit about NERC's posture and thinking that the leadership of your organization and the board has on some of these issues? And really, as you answer that, are there some key issues that you still think we need to dig in on and that industry needs to address? Or are there any gaps in engagement from the industry that you would say, we need you to do something else or do something more?
How much time do we have, Todd? No, those are a great series of topics, and those are probably three of the most engaging topics that I talk with my board about and we talk with our members about. So maybe we'll just take those in order. So inverter-based resources, these are really, really critical that we get our arms around these. I was happy that last summer we didn't have a major Odessa, Texas type collapse where a small disturbance out on the grid trips off, 1,800 megawatts of generation for really no reason. We did have an event in Utah, though. It wasn't as dramatic as what we had seen in West Texas, but it's just a reminder, right, that these resources need to be configured and programmed and operated in a way that supports the reliability of the grid. And, there's a lot of work to be done there. And, The great thing about an inverter, as I've come to appreciate, is that they can do pretty much anything we want them to do, but we got to tell them. Right. And if we don't tell them, they're not going to do it, and they're going to react the way they have reacted, which is they panic and they trip offline to protect the panel. And I'd probably do the same thing if I were an inverter. But we got to solve that, and I think the challenge we have with inverters is we're kind of learning about them while we're writing the requirements, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I get that, right? But I think the key message that we got to give our stakeholders and the folks participating in our drafting teams and all that is you got to get comfortable with ambiguity at this point. And
send them to law school.
Well, there you go. But it's similar. I'm sure we'll talk about winter in a little bit too. It's the same thing with winterization, right? I mean, we got to get that right. We got to get it as right as we can, and then trust that we will fine tune it as we learn more going forward. I think that's absolutely true of inverters. One of the big issues that we're struggling with right now is there are a couple things that are very clear. Right, ride through is very, very clear what we need to do there. The modeling of inverters, very, very clear what needs to happen there. One of the areas where we're struggling a little bit is the role of grid forming inverters. And on one hand, it sounds like the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? We can set up an inverter and it'll act just like a synchronous machine in terms of generating frequency and voltage and providing all the important supports to the grid that way. But we've also learned that in some jurisdictions that those have caused oscillations onto the grid and so on and so forth. So, we've got to understand that before, as these continue to become a larger and larger portion of the grid. That also underscores our need to retain the stuff that creates frequency and voltage right now, which remains a very significant focus on us. But we have a number of projects underway around inverters where we've committed to deliver those to FERC this year, and so far as I know, the drafting teams are making good progress on that. So that's inverters. Gas electric. Lots of work to be done there. I will say that I'm really, really encouraged because over the last, from a time maybe as recently as 2 years ago, it was, two industries just talking past each other. And I think, over the last year, we've seen much more constructive dialogue, and, I see people leaning in to try to at least understand what the parameters of some solutions could be. And this is, of course, a really hard problem. If it wasn't a hard problem, it would have been solved, right? And there's great reasons why the challenges between the gas system and the electric system persist. Part of it is that most of our electric policy was developed in the late 80s, early 90s. Most of our natural gas policy was developed in the late 70s, early 80s. At that point, gas was kind of a hobby in the power sector. And gas deregulation and so forth didn't contemplate gas being 40% of our fuel mix. And at that time, even when gas started to really become a major factor in the power sector with the advent of combined cycle technology, we still had lots of other resources around. So it was, we had a lot of diversity. But as we continue to lose coal and nuclear and other assets, gas becomes more and more that critical fuel that keeps the lights on. And I keep reminding our friends in the gas industry that we're now 40% of your sales. And you're 40% of our fuel mix. So it's not a hobby anymore, right? We are inextricably linked. And as we learned during the URI assessment, the systems are fundamentally interconnected, right? So we got to figure out a way to make these two systems operate during these times of stress the way that we want them to. And I always remind people that every process and every system is perfectly designed to deliver the results that it delivers. And the gas electric sector that we have right now delivers spectacular results 350 days a year. Unfortunately, right, there's that 5 to 15 days that it doesn't. And one of the things I really liked about the proposal that you and EPSA and Inga put together was it kind of recognized that, maybe we need a temporal solution, right? Something that gets spun up, during one of these events that doesn't muck up all the good stuff that happens the other 350 days of the year, but does recognize that in those 10 to 15 days, we got to get that right. So I think there's work to do on that, but like I said, I see a lot more constructive dialogue going on than we've seen previously on that issue. So I think that bodes well. And then the last issue we talked about was cyber.
Yeah.
Boy, that's terrifying. The state of political unrest around the world, whether it's the ongoing problems in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, this cataclysm that's happening in the Middle East, and the potential for that to escalate much more broadly, and then whatever China ends up deciding to do as it kind of works to deflect attention away from its own economic woes and has its aspirations relative to Taiwan. The nation state environment right now is as bad as it's ever been. And, we continue to see software vulnerabilities, be uncovered at an alarming rate. You've probably read about this Chinese group, Volt Typhoon, which very scary, the capabilities that they have in place. So kind of continuing to hunt and eradicate malware and adversarial attacks in our systems has to continue to be job one across the sector. And it's of course it's not a fair fight because it's private companies against nation state actors, and that's dicey.
Yeah, indeed. Your comments remind me of a comment you made at dinner last night, which is you're a lot of fun at dinner parties because, the conversation's always so optimistic and positive.
Yeah,
so,
I never get asked back.
if a better moderator would have thought to ask you ahead of time, how are we preparing for the eclipse? I mean, I know you're thinking about it, and I didn't prep you ahead of time, but I know that's a little lighter topic, and it's kind of fascinating. The public's really interested in this. How are you thinking about it?
No, well, it's interesting because the eclipse is going to come from Mexico right across Texas, where we have a tremendous amount of solar installation, right, and then kind of moving up to the Northeast. I mean, I'd say the biggest area of concern is going to be all the solar in West Texas. Two things are going to help us out on this. One is that it's in April, right, as opposed to August. Right. The last total eclipse we had was August 2017. And the interesting thing that we learned there was that when first of all, you only really get the photo impact of the eclipse if you're in the path of totality. Right, because the sun's so bright that even if it's like 5% exposed, you barely notice it. But what we learned in the 2017 eclipse is that when the totality occurs, load drops because the temperature drops really quickly. So I haven't talked to ERCOT explicitly about that, but I think the fact that it's in a relatively low load month and the fact that we probably will have that impact between demand and the sunshine will probably get us through it without a whole lot of thing. Right now I'm just trying to figure out where I can get to see it.
Exactly right. So, well, I know you, and I really appreciate this about you, is we've talked about problems a lot. We're trying to be in the solutions business. And so you've often said we've done enough navel gazing, and I couldn't agree with you more about that. One of the issues that had to be addressed this year was this cold weather standard, and that needed a little encouragement, I'll use that word, to get it finalized at the start of the year, and surely other things are also on the table to be done. How do you view the relationship between NERC and the broader industry? Are things better, worse, the same than they were a year ago? Are you having enough engagement? I'll say it that way. And what does peak cooperation look like in your view?
That's a great question, Todd. I think here's the great news in addressing any of these challenging issues that we have in front of us. Whenever I get out and I talk, particularly with senior leadership around the issues and so forth, the alignment is actually kind of scary in terms of.
In a good way.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? Because everybody wants inverters solved. Everybody wants winterization solved. Nobody wants to be on the wrong end of any of these events, right? The challenge that we have is that we were, my chairman's pretty good about describing this. We were designed to deal with the stuff that came out of the 2003 blackout, right? Get your trees trimmed, maintain your facility ratings correctly, that sort of stuff. We're now into these more difficult areas, but we have built a a culture around everything's got to be perfect, as opposed to it's got to be good enough, right? And we can fine tune it later. The other issue is that we're pushing into areas of where requirements are required that weren't as important before. So, we probably didn't pay that much attention to the generating sector, right? To be perfectly blunt. Inverters, again, brand new communities, right, to bring into the grid. Talking with natural gas, again, they're different people around the table, and they don't have the same kind of longitudinal experience with us that we've had. So there's been a lot of education required. I think and that's one of the reasons why last year the NERC board put such a focus on retooling some of our standards processes, creating more flexibility for our standards committee to move things along more quickly, and ultimately giving the board itself authority to issue some directives to the drafting teams. We did get the cold weather requirements passed on the schedule that FERC set for us to do, and got them filed on time, and I think they're good requirements. Obviously it's drawn some protest at FERC that maybe they don't go far enough, and I've got some sympathy for that argument. But I think we feel pretty good about what we put in front of FERC and what we put in front of the board for acceptance and FERC for approval, and I'm hoping that they will approve them. I would not be surprised if they would come back and order us to do some compliance filings, which we were going to do anyway, to assess its efficacy. But I think that's indicative of things we have in front of us, right? I think as we get closer to the short strokes on inverters, as we start looking at energy adequacy standards, I think we're going to get a lot of people kind of nervous about whether we've got it exactly right. And we're going to have to just get a little bit more comfortable, I think, with getting it close enough, and then trusting us in since these are enforceable standards, that we'll take all that into account in the compliance monitoring and enforcement area.
Yeah, that margin of error is really important.
Yeah.
So summer's right around the corner, and you'll have another report that you'll be sharing soon. Are there any sneak peeks that you want to share with us, or really broadly, are you more or less comfortable this summer than you were last year, or are things pretty stable because it's cooling, it's wildfires, it's storm season, it's all sorts of things that impact summer reliability? So from your seat, how are you viewing the summer?
So I don't have a preview of the summer assessment. That data is just now coming in, so we're a little ahead of the game on that. But I think California obviously has had really good water years over the last couple seasons. So the drought concerns in California aren't as high as they were, but now they're in the Northwest, right? Because it's been dry up there. We had wildfires, a fairly significant wildfire in Northwest Texas earlier this year. So and we had wildfires all over Canada last year. So the wildfire issues remain of concern. We still have major drought conditions in the inland part of the West and in Texas. We will have undoubtedly added a lot of new load to the grid with data center construction over the last year. Offsetting that, we've certainly deployed a lot of solar and more batteries. So I need to kind of wait for the sums to come together to see whether net we're in better shape or worse shape than last year. But last year we got through that heat dome. That lasted over 2 months with triple-digit temperatures in places that don't normally get triple-digit temperatures. So pretty encouraged by that. So we'll see. Ask me in a month.
Okay, fair enough. So you've walked through a list of things that I think are on your mind, but if I had to ask you to prioritize the 3 things that are keeping you up at night, I mean, obviously reliability is paramount. We would all agree with that. But do you have kind of a way that you're thinking about the 3 things that you think are critical? And it occurs to me as I ask you another negative question that part of the reason that you have all these doom and glooms is probably the moderators asking you questions that, hey, can you tell us one more thing that's terrible? But as you think about it, what are kind of the 3 things that are particularly important to you?
Well, I think the 3 that we already talked about, right? It's staying ahead, or staying ahead may not even be possible, but
Right.
it's staying on pace with the evolution of the cyber and physical threats.
Yep.
You know, the fact that we have an election this year is very concerning,
Yeah.
both for cyber interference that we might get from nation-state actors to domestic terrorists, which we believe are becoming much more active in the physical security space. And we saw that in North Carolina and Seattle and other places in the Northwest in the last year and a half. So we're anticipating a fairly active year on the security front with the ISAC.
Yeah.
I think getting these inverter standards, we got to get them done, right? The inverters they're no longer hobbies, right? They're a substantial part of the generation mix. We got to make sure that they're working well with the rest of the system. And then, you know, the other thing that we're watching very closely, and I don't know if it's going to come to a head this summer or if it's next summer, but you know, we now have some plants scheduled for retirement that have the potential to create some massive reliability challenges. And the poster child on this, I think, is the Brandon Shores coal plant in the Inner Harbor of Baltimore. And I think that's scheduled to be retired in 2025, I believe. PJM, I think, has identified a transmission solution to that, but that's not likely to get built for 4 or 5 years. So there's a problem there, right? And I think there's this issue between the RTOs, the state regulators, and FERC around who's really responsible for resource adequacy. And you know, we've had some good discussion around that in the context of the New England situation with a couple of the technical conferences that FERC has held up there. I think it's going to come out in spades with this issue around Brandon Shores. So watching that very closely.
Well, we're almost to the end of our time, so I'm going to ask you a question. I hope we can end
Softball,
on a
please.
positive note, if at all possible. So are conditions just so volatile and evolving at such a rapid pace that we're playing catch up, or do you think we can get ourselves to the position where we're able to be proactive, getting ahead of the assessments, and then support and get to ahead of the curve on the evolving energy system? The energy transition term we don't like. I prefer to call it energy expansion because, as Chairman Thompson noted, we're going to need more of everything, not less. So that's why we think about it that way. But do you think we can get to a spot that we're there, or are the laundry list of issues really so great that we're just scrambling to play catch up? Because I'm like Nate. I guess I'm the closet optimist who thinks that if we really focus as an industry, we can get there, but I'm curious if you view it the same way.
Well, my job is to always look for what's missing.
Fair
so
enough.
that's why they don't invite me anymore. No, look, I think we absolutely could, but one, the list of things to get done is extraordinarily long.
That's right.
Right? And my colleague at WEC, the Western Regional Entity, kind of describes it. It's everything, everywhere, all at once, and that it is kind of how it feels. Now, we did put together last year a fairly clear prioritization, for at least for our working standards, right, in terms of what we're going to get done this year, next year, and year after that. So we've tried to get everybody kind of focused on a manageable number of things, which means that there are a lot of important things that aren't getting done right now. But so that list is kind of continuing to grow. I think the big challenge, first of all, we absolutely could get ahead of this, but it's not the nature of the beast. You know, our industry has forever been extraordinarily reactive, and you know, I think the leadership of the sector broadly, and when I say of the sector, I'm including the gas in here too, because I've had a chance to meet with a lot of gas CEOs over the last couple months, and they're all kind of saying, let's get ahead of this, let's lean in, and so on and so forth. Somewhere along the line, that kind of breaks down when we get to the folks that actually show up to do the work with us. And then there are reasons for that, right? Because they're more on the hook for making sure that it's right, as opposed to done quickly. So I think there's some cultural things that we have to deal with as a sector to be able to move at the pace that we need to move at. And it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think it's eminently doable. I think we need to kind of continue to do our job at keeping the priorities clear and moving things along at pace, not too fast, right? Because we don't want to be reckless. But but we got to keep moving things along because the list of issues is continuing to grow.
It's not getting any shorter.
Right, it's not going to get shorter anytime soon. So we got to start spitting stuff out and just being able to balance the effort.
Yeah, well, Jim, thank you so much for your time and attention, for your passion about these issues. This is not easy stuff. And you're committed on focusing attention to the issue and then working towards solutions. And for that, we're grateful because we share that aspiration to get the solutions and then implement the solutions, because together that'll make reliability that much more achievable.
Right.
So thank you very much for that. Thanks for joining us this morning. We certainly appreciate it. If you'd join me in thanking Jim for his participation, we really appreciate it.
Good deal. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.